Produced from the Cube Studios, this is Strong by Science. In-depth conversations about science-based training, sports performance, and all things health and wellness. Here's your host, Max Schmarzo.
All right, thank you guys for tuning in today. I have the one and only Dean of Big Data, the man, the myth, the legend. Bill Schmarzo, also my dad, is the CTO of Hitachi Vantara and IoT and analytics. He has a very interesting background because he is he's known as the Dean of Big Data, but also the king of the court in all things basketball related when it comes to our household. And unlike most people in the data world, I don't want to say most as an umbrella term, but some, Big Bill has an illustrious sports career, playing at Coe College, the Harvard of the Midwest, my alma mater as well. But I think having that background of not just being computer science, but where you have multiple disciplines involved when it comes to your jazz career, you had basketball career, you have obviously the career you're on now. All that plays a huge role in being able to interpret and take multiple domains and put it into one. So thank you for being here, Dad.
Thanks, Max. That's a great introduction. I very appreciate that.
No, it's wonderful to have you. And for our listeners who are not aware, Bill is, I'm referring to him as Bill. He's my dad, but if I call him my dad the whole time, it's going to drive me crazy. Bill has a mind that thinks not like most. So when he sees things, he thinks about it, not just in terms of the single, trajectory that could be taken, but the multiple domains that it can go. So both vertically and horizontally. And when we talk about data is something so commonly brought up in sports, so commonly brought up in performance and athletic development. Big data is probably one of the biggest, catchphrases or hot words or sayings that people have nowadays. But it doesn't always have a lot of meaning to it, because a lot of times we get the word big data and then we don't have action out of big data. And Bill's specialty is not just big data, but it's getting action out of big data. With that, going forward, I think a lot of this talk will be talking about how to utilize big data, how to utilize data in general, how to organize it, how to put yourself in a situation to get actionable insights. And so just to start it off, Bill, can you talk a little bit about your background, some of the things you've done, and how you've developed the insights that you have?
Thanks, Max. I have kind of a very, I don't want to say deep background, but I've been doing data and analytics a long time. And I was very fortunate, one of those, Forrest Gump moments in life where in the late 1980s, I was involved in a project at Procter & Gamble. In fact, I ran the project where we brought in Walmart's point of sales data for the first time into what we would now call a data warehouse. And for many, this became the launching point of the data warehouse BI marketplace. And we can trace the origins of many of the BI players to that project at Procter & Gamble in 87 and 88. And I spent a big chunk of my life just a big believer in business intelligence and data warehousing and trying to amass data together and trying to use that data to report on what's going on and providing insights. And I did that for 25 years of my life until, as you probably remember, Max, I was recruited out of Business Objects, where I was the vice president of analytic applications. I was recruited out of there by Yahoo. And Yahoo had a very interesting problem, which is they needed to build analytics for their advertisers to help those advertisers to optimize their spend across the Yahoo ad network. And what I learned there, in fact, what I unlearned there, was that everything that I had learned about BI and data warehouse and how you constructed data warehouses, how you were so schema-centric, how everything was evolved around tabular data. At Yahoo, there was an entirely different approach. I have my first introduction to Hadoop and the concept of a data lake. That was my first real introduction into data science and how to do predictive analytics and prescriptive analytics. And in fact, it was such a huge change for me that I was asked to come back to the TDWI, the Data Warehouse Institute, where I was teaching for many years. And I was asked to do a keynote after being at Yahoo for a year or so to share sort of what were the observations, what did I learn And I remember I stood up there in front of about 600 people and I started my presentation by saying, everything I've taught you the past 20 years is wrong. And it was, well, I didn't get invited back for 10 years. So that probably tells you something. But it was really about unlearning a lot about what I had learned before. And probably, Max, one of the things that was one of the aha moments for me was BI was very focused on understanding the questions that people were trying to ask and answer. Data science is about understanding the decisions they're trying to take action on. Questions, by their very nature, are informative, but decisions are actionable. And so, what we did at Yahoo in order to really help our advertisers optimize their spend across the Yahoo ad network is we focused on identifying the decisions the media planners and buyers and the campaign managers had to make around running a campaign. How much money to allocate to what sites, how many conversions do I want, how many impressions do I want. So all the decisions we built predictive analytics around so that we could deliver prescriptive actions to these two classes of stakeholders, the media planners and buyers and the campaign managers, who had no aspirations about being analysts. They're trying to be the best digital marketing executives or people they could possibly be. They didn't want to be analysts. So, and that sort of leads me to where I am today. And my teaching, my books, my blogs, everything I do is very much around how do we take data and analytics and help organizations become more effective. So everything I've done since then, the books I've written, the teaching I do at the University of San Francisco, and next week at the National University of Ireland in Galway, and all the clients I work with, is really how do we take data and analytics and help organizations become more effective at driving the decisions that optimize their business and their operational models. It's really about decisions and how do we leverage data and analytics to drive those decisions.
So, how would you define the difference between a question that someone's trying to answer versus a decision that they're trying to be better informed on?
So here's what I'd put it. I call it the SAM test, SAM. And that is it strategic? Is it actionable? Is it material? And so you can ask questions that are provocative, but you might not ask questions that are strategic to the problems you're trying to solve. You may not be able to ask questions that are actionable in the sense you know what to do. And you don't necessarily ask questions that are material in the sense that the value of that question is greater than the cost of answering that question, right? And so if I think about the SAM test, when I apply it to data science and decisions, when I start mining the data, so I know what decisions are most important. I've gone through a process to identify, to validate, to value, and prioritize those decisions, right? I understand what decisions are most important. Now, when I'm starting to dig through the data, all this structured, unstructured data across a number of different data sources, I'm trying to codify patterns and relationships buried in that data, and I'm applying the SAM test against those insights. Is it strategic to the problem I'm trying to solve? Can I actually act on it? And is it material in the sense that it's more valuable to act than it is to create the action around it? So that's to me the big difference is, by their very nature, decisions are actionable. I'm trying to make a decision. I'm going to take an action. Questions, by their nature, are informative, interesting. They could be very provocative. Questions have an important role, but ultimately, questions do not necessarily lead to actions.
So if I'm a sport coach, I'm running a professional basketball team, some of the decisions I'm trying to make are I'm deciding on what program best develops my players, what metrics will help me decide who the best prospect is. Is that the right way of looking at it?
Yeah. So we did an exercise at USF to have the students go through an exercise to what decisions does Steve Kerr need to make over the next two games that he's playing, right? And we go through an exercise of identifying, especially in-game decisions, exercise routes. So, how often are you going to play somebody? How long are they going to play? What are the right combinations? What are the kind of offensive plays that you're going to try to run? So there's a bunch of decisions that Steve Kerr, as coach of the Warriors, for example, needs to make in the game to not only try to win the game, but to also minimize wear and tear on his players. And by the way, that's a really good point to think about. the good decisions are always a conflict of other ideas, right? Win the game while minimizing wear and tear on my players, right? There are all the important decisions in life have 2, 3, or 4 different variables that may not be exactly the same, which is this is where data science comes in, because data science is going to look across those 3 or 4 or the metrics against which you're going to measure success, and tries to figure out what's the right balance of those given the situation I'm in. So going back to the decision about playing time, well, think about all the data you might want to look at in order to optimize that. So when's the next game? How far are they in the season? Where do they currently sit ranking wise? How many minutes per game has player X been playing? Looking over the past few years, what's their maximum point? So there's not a lot of decisions that the people are trying to make. And by the way, the beauty of the decisions is the decisions really haven't changed in years, right? What's changed is not the decisions, it's the answers. And the answers have changed because we have this great bounty of data available to us, in-game performance, health data, DNA data, all kinds of other data. And then we have all these great advanced analytic techniques, neural networks and unstructured or supervised machine learning, right? All this great technology now that can help us to uncover those relationships and patterns that are buried in the data that we can use to help individualize those decisions. One last point there, the point there to me at the end. When people talk about big data, they get fixated on the big part, the volume part. It's not the volume of big data that I'm going to monetize, it's the granularity. And what I mean by that is I now have the ability to build very detailed profiles. Going back to our basketball example, I can build a very detailed performance profile on every one of my players. So for every one of the players on the Warriors team, I can build a very detailed profile that details out, what's their optimal playing time. How much time should they spend before a break on the court, right? What are the right combinations of players in order to generate the most offense or the best defense? I can build these very detailed individual profiles, and then I can start meshing them together to find the right combination. So when we talk about big, it's not the volume that's interesting, it's the granularity.
Gotcha. And what's interesting from my world is, so when you're dealing with marketing and business, a lot of that when you're developing, whether it be a company that you're trying to find more out about your customers, or your startup trying to learn about what product you should develop, there's tons of unknowns. And a lot of big data, from my understanding, can help you better understand some patterns within customers, how to market. In your book, you talk about, oh, we need to increase sales at Chipotle because we understand X, Y, and Z are occurring around us. Now, in the sports science world, we have our friend called science. And science has helped us already identify certain metrics that are very important and correlated to different physiological outcomes. So it almost gives us a shortcut, because in the big data world, especially when you're dealing with the data that you guys are dealing with and trying to understand customer decisions, each customer is an individual, and you're trying to compile it all together to find patterns. No one's doing science on that, right? It's not like a lab work where someone is understanding muscle protein synthesis and the amount of nutrients you need to recover from it. So in my position, I have all these pillars that maybe exist already where I can begin my search. There's still a bunch of unknowns. With that kind of environment, do you take a different approach, or do you still go with the, I guess, large encompassing, collect everything you can and siphon after? Maybe I'm totally wrong, but I'll let you take it away.
No, it's a good question. And what's interesting about that, Max, is that the human body is governed by a series of laws, we'll say. Kinesiology and the things you've talked about, physics, they have laws. Humans as buyers, shoppers, travelers, we have propensities, we don't have laws, right? I have a propensity that I'm going to try to fly United because I get easier upgrades. But I might fly, Southwest because of schedule or convenience, right? I have propensities, I don't have laws. So you have laws that work to your advantage. What's interesting about laws, if you start going into the world of IoT and this concept called digital twins, they're governed by laws of physics. I have a compressor or a chiller or an engine, and it's got a bunch of components in it that have been engineered together, and I can actually apply the laws. I can actually run simulations against my digital twins to understand exactly when is something likely to break. What's the remaining useful life in that product? What's the severity of the maintenance I need to do on that? So the human body, unlike the human psyche, is governed by laws. Human behaviors are really hard, right? And Las Vegas is built on the fact that human behaviors are so flawed. But body physics, like the physics that run these devices, you can actually build models and run simulations to figure out exactly how, what's the wear and tear and what's the extensibility of what you can operate in.
Gotcha. Yeah. So that's when, from our world, you start looking at subsystems and you say, okay, this is your muscular system. This is your autonomic nervous system. This is your central nervous system. These are ways that we can begin to measure it. And then we wrote a blog on this, and it's a stress response model where you understand these systems and their inferences for the most part. And then you apply a stress and you see how the body responds. Um, then you determine, okay, well, if I know the body can only respond in a certain number of ways, it's either compensatory, it's going to be returning to baseline, it might be maladaptation, but there's only so many ways when you look at a cell at an individual level that cell can actually respond. And it's the aggregation of all these cellular responses that end up and manifest in a change in a subsystem, and that subsystem can be measured inferentially through certain technology that we have. um, but I also think at the same time, we make a huge leap. And that leap is the word inference, right? We're making an assumption. And sometimes those assumptions are very dangerous and they lead to, because if that assumption's unknown and we're wrong on it, then we kind of swing and miss a little bit on our whole projection. So I like the idea of looking at patterns and look at the probabilistic nature of it. And I've actually kind of recently changed my view a little bit from when we first had talked about this, I was much more hardwired in laws, but I think it's a law, but maybe a law with some level of variation or standard deviation in it. We have guardrails instead. Um, so that's kind of how I think about it personally. Is that something that you say that's on the right track for that, or how would you approach it?
Yeah, actually, there's a lot of similarities, Max. So your description of the human body made up of subsystems, when we talk to organizations about things like smart cities or smart malls or smart hospitals, a smart city is comprised it's made up of a series of subsystems, right? I've got subsystems regarding water and wastewater, traffic, safety, local development, things like this. There's a bunch of subsystems that make a city work. And each of those subsystems is comprised of a series of decisions or clusters of decisions, which equal use cases around which you're trying to optimize. So if I'm trying to improve traffic flow, if one of my subsystems is traffic flow, there are a bunch of use cases there about, where do I do maintenance? Where do I expand the roads? Where do I put HOV lanes, right? So if you start taking apart the smart city into the subsystems and then know the subsystems are comprised of use cases, that puts you into a really good position. Now, here's something we did recently with a client who was trying to think about building the theme park of the future. And how do we make certain that we really have a holistic view of the use cases that I need to go after? It's really easy to identify the use cases within your own four walls, but digital transformation in particular happens outside the four walls of an organization. And so what we're doing is a process where we're building journey maps for all their key stakeholders. So you've got a journey map for a customer, you have a journey map for operations, you have a journey map for partners and such. So you build these journey maps and you start thinking about, for example, I'm a theme park, and at some point in time, my guest / customer is going to have epiphany. They want to go do something. They want to go on vacation. Right? At that point in time, that theme park is competing against not only all the other theme parks, but it's competing against Major League Baseball, who's got things. It's competing against, going to the beach in Sanibel Island, just hanging around, right? They're competing at that point. And if they only start engaging the customer when the customer has actually contacted them, they miss a huge part of the market. They miss a huge chance to influence that person's agenda. And so one of the things to think about, I don't know how this applies to your space, Max, but as we start thinking about smart entities, we use design thinking and customer journey maps as a way to make certain that we're not fooling ourselves by only looking within the four walls of our organization, that we're knocking those walls down, making them very porous, and we're looking at what happens before somebody engages with us and even afterwards. So again, going back to the theme park example, once they leave the theme park, they're probably posting on social media what kind of fun they had or fun they didn't have. They're probably making plans for next year. They're talking to friends and everything. So there's a bunch of stuff, we're going to call it afterglow, that happens after event that you want to make certain that you're in part of influencing that. So again, I don't know how, when you combined the data science of use cases and decisions with design thinking of journey maps, what that might mean to what your business. But for us, in thinking about smart cities, it's opened up all kinds of possibilities. And most importantly, for our customers, it's opened up all kinds of new areas where they can create new sources of value.
So anyone listening to this needs to understand that when the word client or customer is used, it can be substituted for athlete. And what I think is really important is that when we hear you talk about the amount of infrastructure you do for an idea when you approach a situation is something that sports science, for in my opinion, especially across multiple domains, is truly lacking. What happens is we get a piece of technology and someone says, go do science. While you're taking the approach of let's actually think out what we're doing beforehand, let's determine our key performance indicators, let's understand maybe the journey that this piece of technology is going to take with the athlete, or how the athlete's going to interact with this piece of technology throughout their 4 years. If you're in the private sector, right, that afterglow effect might be something that you refer to as client retention and their ability to come back over and over and spread your own word for you. If you're in the sector with student athletes, maybe it's those athletes talking highly about your program to help with recruiting and understanding that developing athletes is going to help and make that college more enticing to go to, or that program or that organization. But what really stood out was the fact that you have this infrastructure built beforehand. And the example I give, I've spoken with a good number of organizations and teams about data utilization, is that if you were to all of a sudden be dropped in the middle of the woods and someone says go build a cabin, and I was in a giant forest, I could use as much wood as I want. I could just keep chopping down trees until I had something that was a shelter of some sort, right? Even I could probably do that. So if someone said, you know what, you have 3 trees to cut down to make a cabin, you're going to become very efficient, and you're going to think about each chop and each piece of wood and how it's going to be used in your interaction with that wood in conjunction with that wood's interaction with yourself. And so when we start looking at athlete development, or we're looking at client retention, or we're looking at general health and wellness, it's not just, oh, this is a great idea, right? We want to make the world's greatest theme park, or we want to make the world's greatest training facility. But what infrastructure and steps do you need to take? And you said stakeholders. So what individuals am I working with? Am I talking with the physical therapist? Am I talking with the athletic trainer? Am I talking with the skill coach? How does the skill coach want the data presented to them? Maybe that's different than how the athletic trainer is going to have the data presented to them. Maybe the sport coach doesn't want to see the data unless a red flag comes up. So now you have all these different entities, just like how you're talking about developing this customer journey throughout the theme park and making sure that they have an experience that's memorable and causes an afterglow and really gives that experience meaning. How can we now take data and apply it in the same way so we get the most value, like you said, out of the granular aspect of data, and really turn that into something valuable?
Max, you said something really important. And one of the things that, and let me share one of many horror stories um, that comes up in my daily life, which is somebody walking up to me and saying, "Hey, I got a client. Here's their data. Go do some science on it." Like, well, what the heck, right? So, and we created this thing called the hypothesis development canvas. Our sales teams hate it. Our data science, uh, uh, our data science teams love it because we do all this pre-work. As you said, we make sure we understand the problem we're going after, the decisions they're trying to make, the KPIs against which you're going to measure success and progress. What are the operational and financial and business benefits? What are the data sources we want to consider? Here's something, by the way, that's important that maybe I wish Boeing would have thought more about, which is what are the costs of false positives and false negatives, right? Do you really understand where your risk points are? And the reason why false positives and false negatives are really important in data science is because data science is making predictions. And by virtue of making predictions, we are never 100% certain if that's right or not. So predictions have to be built on good enough. Well, when is good enough good enough? And a lot of that determination as to when is good enough is really around the cost of false positives and false negatives. Think about a professional athlete, right? The false, the ramifications of overtraining a professional athlete like a Kevin Durant or a Steph Curry, and they're out for the playoffs, has huge financial implications for them personally and for the organization. So you really need to make sure you understand exactly what's the cost of being wrong. And so this hypothesis development canvas is we do a lot of this work before we ever put science to the data.
That yeah, um, it's something that's lacking across not just sports science but many fields. And what I mean by that is, especially you refer to the hypothesis canvas. It's a piece of paper that provides a common language, right? It's you can sit it out beforehand. For listeners who aren't aware, a hypothesis canvas is something Bill has worked to develop with his team, and it's about 13 different squares and boxes, and you can manipulate it based on your own profession and what you're diving into. But essentially, it goes through the infrastructure that you need to have set up in order for this hypothesis or idea or decision to actually be worth a damn. And what I mean by that is that so many times, and I hate this, but I'm going to go on a little bit of a rant and I apologize, is that people think, oh, I get an idea. And they think Thomas Edison all of a sudden just had an idea and he made a light bulb. Thomas Edison's famous for saying, I didn't, make a light bulb. I learned was it 9,000 ways to not make a light bulb. And what I mean by that is he set up an environment that allowed for failure and allowed for learning. What happens often, people think, oh, I have an idea. They think the idea comes not just in a flash, because it always doesn't. It might come from some research, but they also believe that it comes with legs and it comes with the infrastructure supported around it. And that's kind of the same way that I see a lot of the data aspect going in regards to our field is that we get an idea, we immediately implement, and we hope it works, as opposed to set up a learning environment that allows you to go, okay, here's what I think might happen. Here's my hypothesis. Here's I'm going to apply it. And now if I fail, because I have the infrastructure pre-mapped out, I can look at my infrastructure and say, you know what, that support beam or that individual box itself was the weak link. And we made a mistake here, but we can go back and fix it.
So 2 points, Max. First off, ideas aren't worth a damn. Everybody's got ideas, right? I could give a holy hoot about ideas. I mean, I got people who throw ideas at me all the friggin' time. I don't give a shit. I just really don't give a shit, right? I want actions. Show me how I'm going to turn something into an action. How am I going to make something better? Right. And I want to know ahead of time what that something is. Am I trying to improve customer retention, trying to improve recovery time for an athlete who's got back-to-back games, right? I know what I'm trying to do, and I want to focus on that. Where ideas become great, and you said it really well, Max, is ideas are something that I want to test. So, but I know what I want to test vis-a-vis what outcome I'm trying to drive. So it isn't ideation for the sake of ideation. It's ideation around the idea that I need to drive an outcome. I need to have athletes that are better prepared for the next game, who can recover faster, who are stronger and can play through a longer point of the season. Here we are in March Madness. And we know, by the way, that the teams that tend to rise to the top are the teams that have gone through a more rigorous schedule, played tougher teams, right? They're better prepared for this. And it's really hard for a mid-major team to get better prepared because they're playing a bunch of lollipop teams in their own conference. So it's ideas really don't excite me. Ideation does. Around an environment that allows me to test ideas quickly, fail fast, in order to find those variables or metrics, those data sources that just might be better predictors of performance.
Yeah, I like the idea of acting quickly, failing quickly, and learning quickly, right? You have this loop. And what happens is, and I think every strength coach in the world is probably guilty of this, is we get an idea and we just apply it. You go, oh, I think eccentric training's this great idea, and we're going to do an eccentric training block. And I just apply it to my athletes, and you don't know what the hell happened because you don't have any contextual metrics that you base your process on to actually learn from. So you, at the end of the day, go, I think it worked. They jump high, but you're not comparing that to anything, right?
Right.
They've been in the weight room for 3 months. My God, I hope they jump higher. I hope they're stronger. Like I can sit in the weight room and probably get stronger for 3 months. And my thought is, like, let's have context and some, I call them anchor data points that we're always reflecting back on. So, for example, if I have a key performance metric where I want to jump high, I'll always track jumping high, but then I can apply different interventions, eccentric training, power training, strength training, and I can see the stress response of these KPIs. So now I've set up an environment that we have our charter still there. My charter being I'm going to improve my athletic development, and that's my goal. And I'm basing that charter on the KPI of jumping high, so key performance indicator of jumping high. Now I can apply different blocks and interventions with that anchor point over and over again. And the example I give is I don't come home and ask my girlfriend how she's doing once every month. I ask her every day. And that's my anchor point, right? And I might try different things. I might try cooking. I might try making dinner. I might do the dishes. I might stop forgetting our dates. I might actually buy groceries for once. But if she gets happier, then I'll continue to buy groceries. Maybe I'll remember it's her birthday, March 30th. I remember that. That's why I put it on there. Right. And so, but the idea is we have in life, the way life works, we have these nodular points where we call anchor points, where we self reflect and we reflect off of others. And we understand our progress in our own life environment based on these anchor points, and we progress and we apply different interventions. I want this job. Maybe I'll try having this idea outside of here. Maybe I'll play in a softball league. And we're always reflecting, is that making me happier? Is that making me feel fulfilled? And I don't understand why we don't take what we do every day in life subconsciously and apply it into the sports science world. But a lot of it is because it happens subconsciously because that's how our body has learned to evolve. We have anchor points. I want to survive. I want to have kids, lots of kids, strong kids, and die. And I die so my kids can have my food. And that's what we want as a body, right? Your body doesn't care about anything else. And so that's why you walk with a limp. After you get hurt, you don't walk perfect again. It's a waste of energy to walk perfect, right? You can still have kids with a limp. I hate to break it to you, right? We're not running from animals anymore. And so we have all these anchor points in life. Let's apply that same model now. And like you said, it's like design thinking and actually having the architecture to outline it, whether it's in that hypothesis canvas, to force us to now consciously do it, because we're not just interacting with ourselves now, we're interacting with other systems, other nodes of information to now have to work together in unison to achieve our company's charter.
Interesting, Max. There's a lot of key points in there. The one that strikes me is measurement. John Smale at Procter and Gamble, I was there, used to always say, "You are what you measure, and you measure what you reward." That was his way of saying, as an organization, that the compensation systems are critical. And the story you just walked through about what Kelsey, right, and what you guys are doing, and how you increase your happiness level, right,
My worth
is
of damnness.
your work. I mean, that is how you're rewarded, right? If you're rewarded by happiness, and so you learn to measure, if you're smart, right, that you don't miss birthdays, that you do dishes, you help up around the house, you do things, and when you do those things, the happiness meter goes up, and when you don't do those things, happiness meter goes down, and because you're probably polling not just once a day, but as you walk by her throughout the day on a weekend, you're constantly knowing, right? If you're like your mom, right? You know when mom's not happy. You don't need to be a data scientist to know mom's not happy. And so then you re-engineer about, okay, what did I do wrong that causes unhappiness, right? And so life is a lot there's a lot of life lessons that we can learn that we can apply to either our business, our operations, or sports, whatever it might be that your profession is in, about the importance of capturing the right metrics and understanding how those metrics really drive you towards a desired outcome and the rewards you're going to receive from those outcomes.
Yeah, and with those, um, it's the right metrics, right? That's what, not metrics, the right metrics. If I wanted to know if someone was happy, I wouldn't go look at the weather. I wouldn't, check gas prices, especially if I'm curious if they're happy with me. Well, maybe that they
Yeah,
might
yeah,
reflect if they're happy in general. If they're
yeah.
happy with me, right now I'm contextualizing what I'm actually trying to look at. I know a little bit more about what I should look at, but I don't know everything. And so you might have metrics that you say, I know science says this metric is good. This metric is good. Maybe we want to explore these couple of metrics over here because we think that either A, they're related to one of these metrics or they're related to the main outcome itself. And that gives you a way to then, I have these key anchor metrics. It's not stacking the deck, but it's knowing you're going to get insights out of it. And then I have these exploratory metrics over here, which are going to allow me then to dive and explore elsewhere. And if you're a company, those can be trade secrets, they can be proprietary information. If you're a trainer, it can be ways to learn how different athletes adapt to make yourself better. And again, if we're talking about a company and we're talking about a trainer, there's no difference when it comes to trade secrets, right? Trainers keep their trade secrets and companies keep their trade secrets. And as we talk about this, it's really easy to see how these two environments, whether we're talking about a company, athletic development, sports science, personal training, health and wellness, are really universally governed by the same concepts because life itself is typically governed by these concepts. And when we're applying those kind of iterations to it, you can really begin to quickly learn what's going on and whether or not those metrics that you thought were good are good, and whether or not you can learn new metrics and from that.
Max, you raised an interesting question or made a point here that I might be very different in the sports world than it is in the business world, and that is the ability to test. And what I mean by that is, the business world is full of concepts like A/B testing and placebo testing and simulations and things like that. When you're dealing with athletes individually, I would imagine it's really hard to test athlete A with one technique and athlete B with another technique when both these athletes are trying to maximize their performance capabilities in order to maximize, the money they can generate. How do you deal with that?
So, yes, no one wants to get the shitty program. Like,
Yes.
that's correct. And
Right.
for the most part, people don't, uh, and this, I'll take, people don't test like that. But here's my solution to it. Because I think being a critic without a solution is called being an asshole. My solution to that is making it very agile. And so we're not going to be able to, test group A versus group B. But what you can do, if you're a coach and you have faith in, because there are a lot of programs coaches use. Coaches probably use, every offseason, they might try a new program. So there's no real difference, in all honesty, to try a new program on, these seven athletes versus, and then try a different one that you also trust on these seven athletes. And part of that comes from the fact that we have science and evidence to show that both these programs are really good, right? But there's no one's actually broken down the minutia of it. And so, yes, you probably could do A and B testing because you have faith in both programs. So it's not like either athlete's getting the wrong program. They're both getting programs that are going to probably elicit an outcome of performing better, but who wants to perform the best?
Right.
The second aspect would be what kind of longitudinal data that you can collect very easily to understand typical progression of athletes. For example, if you coach and you coach for 8 years, you'll have, eight different freshman classes theoretically, and you'll begin to understand how a freshman typically progresses to a sophomore and what their key performance indicators typically trend as. And so you can now say, okay, last year we did this. This year we do this. I'm going to see if my freshman class responds differently. Is this going to give us the perfect answer? Absolutely not. No. But without data, you're just another person with an opinion. That's not my quote. I stole that quote, but it's true because if we don't try and audit ourselves and try to understand the process of how is someone developing, then we're just strictly relying on confirmation bias of being, my program was great. Pat some guys in the back that jumped higher and we did awesome. But if we're truly into understanding what's best, then we'll actually try and measure some of these progress, some of these KPIs over time. And the example I give, and it's unfortunate and fortunate, I don't mean anything bad by this either. We're on a salary, right? And so what happens when you're on a salary is no matter really what happens, assuming you're doing your job, you're going to keep your job. But if you look at a startup has one option, and that's to make money or go out of business. Right? They don't really have the luxury of, oh, we're just gonna hang out, and not saying coaches hang up, or not, we're just gonna keep this path we're going on.
As a coach, how do I apply a similar model? A startup, the thing about a startup is you can go from worth $0 to worth 100 million to $1 billion in 1 year. As a coach, we don't have that same environment because we're not producing something tangible, which doesn't have the same capitalistic drive, right? The invisible hand pushing us the same way the free market does with devices. And so we don't always follow the same path that these startups have done, yet that same path and same model might provide better insights.
So Max, you've hit something I found very interesting. Confirmation bias. If you don't take the time before you execute a test, understand the variables that you're going to test, what happens is after the test is over, you go back and try to triage what the drivers were of that impact, and confirmation bias and revisionist history and all these other things that make humans really poor decision makers get in the way. And so before, as a coach, I would imagine, what you'd want to do is set up ahead of time, we're going to test the following things to see if they have impact, right? Thoroughly, like the hypothesis development canvas, right? Thoroughly understand against what you're really going to test. And then when you've done that test, you would have much more confidence in the results of that test versus trying to say, wow, Jimmy jumped 2 inches higher this year. God, what did he do? Let's figure out and revision it. Was it what he ate? Was it where he slept? Well, he played a lot of video games. That must be it. The video games made him jump higher, right? So I think a lot of sports in particular, even more than the business world, a lot of sports is based on heuristics and gut feel. It's run by a priesthood of former athletes who were great because of their own skills and capabilities, and it maybe had very little to do with their development. And I don't want to pick on Michael Jordan, but Michael Jordan was notoriously a poor coach and a poor judge of talent. He made some of the worst draft choices the industry's ever seen. And that's because he mistakenly thought that everybody was like him, that he revisioned history about, well, what made me great were the following things, so I'm going to look for people like that. Instead of reversing the course and saying, okay, let's figure out ahead of time what will make you a better player, and then trying these tests across a number of different players to figure out, okay, which of these things actually had impact. So sports, I think, has gotten much better. Moneyball sort of opened up people's eyes to it. Now we're seeing more and more teams who are realizing that data science is a discipline. It's not something you apply after the fact, but in order to really uncover what's the real drivers of performance, you have to sit down before you do the test to really understand what it is you're testing, because then you can learn from the tests. And let's be honest, right? Learning is a process of exploring and failing. And if you don't try and fail enough times, if you don't have enough might moments, you'll never have any breakthrough moments.
And I think what people misunderstand is they hear the word fail and assumed, oh, we did a 6-month program and failed. No, failure can occur in 1 day, and that's okay, right? You can use, for example, I'm going to use this piece of technology as motivation for biofeedback to increase my athletes' intent and the amount of effort they put into the weight room. That's your hypothesis. You can test that in 1 day. You put out that piece of technology, the athletes don't respond. Well, you have learned something now. Okay, that technology didn't bring about the motivation I thought. Why was that? You can do reflect and not revision because you had the infrastructure beforehand on maybe notes that you might have taken and scribbled down on your pad or observations from the coach's eye. It might have been, you know what? The athletes weren't very invested because the technology took too long to set up, right? It wasn't the technology's fault. It was the process of getting the technology available to act and utilize on. So maybe you retest again with it set up beforehand or a piece of technology that's much easier to use, and the intent increases. So now you say, okay, it's not the technology's fault, it's the application of how we're using the technology. At the same time, we hear a lot of things like, I'm gonna take a little bit of a pivot, not too far though, is in the baseball world, you see technology being used more and more as a tool, and it's helping guide immediate actions on the field, whether it's spin rates, it's arm velocities with accelerometers, or some sort of measurement they decide to use. But that's not necessarily collecting data. That's using technology as a performance tool. And I think there's a distinction between the two. The two are not mutually exclusive. You can still use it as a performance tool, but that performance data, if the infrastructure is not there to store, file, and reflect and analyze, is only being used one-sided. And so people think, oh, we're doing sports science, we're doing data science because we're collecting data. Well, that's not, I can go count ants, that's collecting data. But that's not, I don't, unless I count ants every day and say, oh, my ant population's decreasing, right? And kind of here's a really easy way to think of it, in my opinion. You have cookies in the fridge, right? And every day I go, and every week we'll say, my mom makes cookies. This doesn't happen. I wish it did, be very cool, but I love you, Mom, and we didn't eat cookies every week. But in the fridge, I go and I count how many cookies there were, right? And using data, I'd say, oh, 12 cookies. If there's any cookies at all, I can eat, right? That's using technology in that moment. But using data science is, well, you know what? She's going to make, 12 in a couple of days, and I have 2 days left, and there's 6 cookies. I can eat 3 today and 3 tomorrow. Because now you're doing prescriptive analytics, right? Because you are prescribing an action based on the information you collected, and it's based on historical data, because you know that every 7th day the cookies are coming. Yep. But I just take it as I'm using technology as a tool. I might only eat 1 cookie and forever be leaving 6 cookies on the table, right? And so there's
don't want to do that.
No, we don't, but we trick ourselves. I think we see that. I'm not saying baseball does this, but I'm saying we see that in all domains. When we use technology, we say, oh, technology good, we had someone use technology, that's data science. No, that's not data science. That's using technology to help augment training. Using data science is understanding the information that happened during the training process, looking at it contextually to then prescribe saying, I'm going to do this exercise or this exercise based on the collection and maturation of the information. So instead of cookies here, I eat 1 cookie, it's, oh, historically, I know there's going to be 12 cookies every 7 days. I have 2 days left. I can eat 3 cookies now. I can hide 2 and tell my sister Amelia, oh, there's only 1 left. Very weird. I don't know who ate the other 2.
Well, Max, let me wrap up with a very interesting challenge that I think all data scientists face, or maybe all citizens of data science face. And when I say citizens of data science, I mean people who understand how to use the results of data science, not necessarily people who are creating the data science. And here's the challenge: that if you make your decisions just based on the numbers alone, you're likely to end up with suboptimal results. And the reason why that happens is because there's lots of outside variables that have huge influence, especially when it comes to humans and even machines to a certain extent. Let me give you an example. Baseball is infatuated with cybermetrics and numbers, right? Everybody is making decisions. We're seeing this now in the current off season. Who was signing contracts and who was given money, and they're using the numbers to show how much is that person really worth, and and organizations are getting really surgical in their ability to figure out that that person's not worth a, a 6-year contract for, $84 million. They're worth a 2-year contract for 36. And that's the best way I'm going to, pay, but minimize my risks. And so the numbers are really driving a lot of that. But it isn't just the big data that helps to make decisions. And in fact, I would argue the insights carried from the small data is equally important, especially in sports. And I think this is a challenge in other parts of the business, is the numbers itself, the data itself doesn't tell the full story. And in particular, think about, how does an organization leverage the small data, the observed data, to really help make better decisions? So right now in baseball, for example, in this offseason, the teams became infatuated with using numbers to figure out who were they going to offer contracts to, how much they were going to pay them for how long. And we saw really the contracts, in most cases, really shrinking in value and size, because people are using the numbers and comparing it to say, oh, so-and-so only got this, you're only going to get this. And numbers are great, but they miss some of the smaller aspects that really differentiate good athletes from great athletes. And those are things like fortitude, heart, effort, resilience, these kind of things that you can't find that in the numbers. So somebody's ability, a closer, right, who goes out there in the 8th inning and just has a shit performance, gets beat up all over the place, comes back in, still has to lead, and does that person have the guts, the fortitude to go back out there after a bad 8th inning and go do it again? Who can fight through when they're tired, it's late in the game, you've been playing, it's a 48-minute game, you've been playing 40 minutes already, you've hardly had a break, and you're down by 2, the ball's in your hand, a 3-pointer is going to win it. What are you going to do? Right? The numbers don't measure that. There's these other metrics out there like fortitude and heart and such that you actually can start to measure. They don't show up in numbers, but they come from the insights from subject matter experts to say, yeah, that person has fight. And in fact, there's one pro team that actually, what they do in the minor leagues, they actually put their players into situations that are almost no win, because they want to see what they're going to do. Do they give up or do they fight back? And you know what? You can't, batting average doesn't tell you that if somebody's going to get up and you're going to give up, it's the 9th inning, you think you've lost, you know what? I don't want that person out there. And so think about, in sports, how do you complement the data that you can see coming off of devices with the data that an experienced coach can say that person's got something extra. They got the fight, they have the fortitude, they have the resilience. When they're down, they keep battling, they don't give up. And from experience, from playing and coaching, I know from playing and coaching, the guy is going to give up. You know who they are. I don't want them on the court, right? It may be the best player from a numbers perspective. Hell, if that was the case, Carmelo Anthony would be an all-star every time. His numbers are always great. The guy lacks heart, right? He doesn't know how to win. So think about how, as an organization, a sporting organization, you use the metrics to help give you a baseline, but don't forget about the soft metrics, the observable things that you got that tell you that somebody has something special.
That is an awesome way to bring this together, because subject matter experts, those are people who have been in the trenches, who see it firsthand. Data is here to augment you in your decisions. It's not here to override you. It's not here to take your place. And so when coaches fear data, it's the silliest thing ever, because it's giving more ammo to a gunslinger. That's all it does, right? It's not going to win the battle, right? It's just the bullets. You got to still aim it and fire. And so when we look at it in regards to performance and athletic development, all these numbers, they'll never be right, ever. They'll never be 100% perfect, but neither will you. And so what we're trying to do is help your decisions with more information that you can process into your brain that you might otherwise not be able to quantify. So it's giving that paintbrush not just the color red, but it's giving all the colors to you. And so now you can make whatever painting you want, and you're not constrained by things you can't measure yourself.
I could add one point, Max, to build on that. Data won't make a shitty coach good, but it'll make a good coach great.
Yeah, yeah, I couldn't agree more. Well, Dad, thank you for being on here. Really appreciate it. And for everyone who's listening, this is going on prime March Madness time. And so to pull away the dean of big data from March Madness, who, for people listening, he made his bracket on the Google Cloud using AI. And so only he, so I was, I guess, thanking him to come here, and only he would be the one to, I guess, take, I don't want to say take the fun out of it, but try and rig the family bracket for using all augmented decision making he possibly can. But
Like I said, the data won't make somebody shitty good, and I'm still not good. Google Cloud couldn't help me. I'm still at the bottom of the family pool.
Oh no, that's great to have you, and I guess every minute here is worth double, being that's March Madness time.
Yeah. Thanks, Max, for the opportunity. It's a fun conversation.
All right, thank you guys for listening. Really appreciate it, and hope you guys tune in next time.